Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Place Exchange, a series that brings you timely topics, trusted voices, and transformative conversations with UW-Madison experts from the School of Education. Place Exchange is hosted by UW-Madison School of Education's Office of Professional Learning and Community Education, and today's session is in partnership with the Department of Counseling Psychology. A special thanks to the School of Education's Dean's Office for their sponsorship, and to all of you for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. One second. There we go. We want to take a moment to invite you to our upcoming session on May 20 with Shamya Karambaya, who will lead us through an engaging session about responsible AI in classrooms. You can register with the link here, which we'll be pasting in the chat um, throughout the session or through the QR code found on the screen. And we want to hear from you. This Place Exchange is a new offering from Place, and we want to know what topics are of interest to you. What challenges are you facing in your workplace, in your home, or in your community? And things like what day and time works best to connect. So please share your feedback with this link or QR code on the screen. So some ground rules as we begin today. First of all, thank you again for joining us. All of the participants were muted upon entry, but you are able to unmute yourself. There will be some interaction with our presenter, and then we ask that during the presentation you stay on mute and place your questions in the chat to a host, which is myself, Stephanie, Sandra, Eric, or Urel. There will be a Q&A segment about 15-20 minutes with Larissa following the lecture. The lecture will be about 55 minutes. It will be recorded and shared with the public on our YouTube. The Q&A portion will not be recorded. Please keep your questions broad and anonymous by not mentioning names, places of employment, and specific questions that only pertain to you. Closed captioning and transcripts have both been enabled for accessibility, and the slides will be shared at the end of the session. So today we are so thrilled to feature Professor Larissa Niec, who will guide us through evidence-based strategies for healthy digital habits in children. So please give a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I wonder if it's possible to turn off the pings on folks entering.
I think we're
Uh,
all set. It's coming through my audio, so I'm muting.
Thanks so much. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. And before I get started, want to thank the Place Exchange staff and faculty and all of the hard work they've done to help get this project going as a whole, and also their support of my webinar today. Just want to remind you, while I'm presenting, I don't get to see you, unfortunately. So like Stephanie said, if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. Also, I'm going to have a little question for you in a moment, and I'd like you to feel free to unmute yourself and share with me. So just to give you a little bit of background of who I am and how I came to this webinar today. I'm a licensed psychologist. My focus is clinical child psychology, and I've spent most of my research career and my clinical work promoting healthy parent-child relationships. So I work very much to develop prevention and treatment models that can help enhance parent-child relationship because that foundation is so important to child development over the lifespan, really. Um, I am new to UW-Madison. I came in just this last fall, very excited to be here, and I am just getting my clinic and my research lab up and running. By the fall, it will be going, and I will be running a parent-child interaction therapy clinic for families and children. And I also do training for therapists as well in parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT. So what I get to talk about today is kind of a little subtopic in child development, in healthy parent-child relationships, and it's really exciting to be here because it's such a timely topic. So we don't have very much time together. In that time, I'm going to give you a lot of different information. And like Stephanie said, this is going to be recorded, so you can always go back and watch it again. I believe that possibly also the slides will be made available, so it's something that you could go and reference again. But in our 50-ish minutes together today, we're going to talk a little bit about young children and screen media use, and basically kind of the state of the science today, where we are, what we know about children and their exposure to screen media. We're going to talk about effective practices for enhancing the parent-child, caregiver-child relationship, and how to be with children, whether you are a parent, an educator, or somebody who works with children in another capacity, how to be with children that really supports their well-being outside of screen use, and specifically some child-centered strategies that we know can help reduce the negative outcomes associated with screen time use. Okay, so I'd like you to take a moment and think about this. I understand that we have a lot of educators in elementary school and a lot of parents and some mental health professionals as well. We may also have some middle school educators in addition to that. Thinking about the children that you know, that you work with, that you teach, that you love, I would love to hear some of the challenging screen time related behaviors that you see in these young children. So this is a point where I'd love for you to unmute yourself and go ahead and share out some of the things that you see, and this will help me to kind of tailor what we talk about today. If people don't feel comfortable shouting it out, if you can put it in the chat or the Q&A, and Stephanie will or Sandra will read it out for us.
Yeah, we have an early elementary teacher who's seen a huge decline in attention span and fine motor skills. Self-regulation is getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
then we have someone said, sorry, I have to type. I'm at home with a loud dog and my own child.
Appreciate it.
Uh,
No problem.
we have a high school teacher. Kids are staying up late at night gaming on technology, then they are sleep
Yes.
deprived in class.
Yes. Yeah.
Transitions off of screens and negotiating for more. It never
Mm.
feels like enough, and parents are struggling to manage.
Yeah.
Elementary teacher and mom, inability to switch away and redirect attention.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, these are great, and they are probably some of the most common kinds of struggles that I'm hearing about at this time. So transitions away from screens, always negotiating for more, um, dealing with tantrums and behaviors around limits on screens, and attention span issues and emotion regulation issues. So all of those things, definitely things that I am hearing as well, and things that we have been starting to explore in the science. So thank you for sharing that, and I'm going to be keeping that in mind, and you can know that that very much directly aligns with the kinds of things we're going to be talking about. So let me share just a little bit to start about Cody. Cody is pseudonym for a 4-year-old little boy that we worked with in my clinic. And Cody's caregivers came in with concerns about the behaviors that were very much like the ones you've just shared. So Cody was really having trouble transitioning away from screens. There would be big tantrums around that. And screen time was taking up and replacing typical healthy peer interaction that 4-year-olds would usually have. So parents were concerned about both of those things, both his increasing difficulty regulating his emotion around limiting screen use and the fact that it was starting to replace kind of healthy activities. So family came in looking for some support, and we saw that the Cody was having some real struggles, and just kind of painting the picture of this child so that you can carry it with you as we talk about what we know about the science of screen use and development and what we don't know yet, and what are some of the strategies that we're using. Also, love for you to think about the kids that you know, the kids that you were sharing information about, or who someone you've got in your head in mind, so that you can start thinking about how some of these things might apply in your own life and with the kids that you interact with. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, in general, what do we know about kids and their exposure to screens at this point? It's something that's been studied for several decades, but we have reached a new peak in our digital age. So let's look at some of the data that we have out there so far. Okay, this came from a comprehensive census that was done by by Common Sense Media, and I'll talk more about them later. They are a great resource, actually, and they were looking at from parents' perspective what kids are being exposed to. What they found is that mobile device use, like smartphones, tablets, is continuing to increase, and it's continuing to be exposed. Children are exposed at younger and younger ages. So at this point, this was 2021, so we were still in the pandemic, and now we're 5 years later out. I can tell you, I know this data points have already increased since then. But as of 2021, we were seeing about 57% of 8 to 12-year-olds who have their own tablet, not shared in the family, but their own. And at least 43% have their own smartphone. And 1/3 of 8-year-olds had their own smartphone. I can tell you also that data as early as 2019, so pre-pandemic, found that up to 75% of 4-year-olds have access to a smartphone. So either they are regularly given a caregiver smartphone to play with, or caregiver's gotten a new phone and the old one was given to the child. So as of 2019, 75% of 4-year-olds. Right? And by the age of 12, we're saying 71% of 12-year-old children have their own smartphone that is dedicated to them, that works, that's connected, that they use on a regular basis. This trend that we're seeing in digital and screen time exposure for kids is global. And there's been a lot of research also done in Japan, and a lot of issues that's coming out of Japan is really parallel to what we're seeing in the US. So it's a good place to look at the science there as well. In Japan, they were finding pretty similar stats to ours. This was a 2023 study, and they found that 99% of 16-year-olds in Japan have their own smartphone. On average, children are spending about 5 hours online every weekday. That's actually quite consistent in the US. We're finding about 4.5 to 5 as well. And primary uses, which again, I'm going to show you this in a minute, is also similar to the US. Primarily first watching videos, playing video games, and then internet searches or some level of interaction, right? And this time on screens in Japan had already increased from 22 to 23. So this is Coming back to US samples, what are children doing online? Again, you can see this is very parallel to the science that was coming out of Japan. And so a total of about 4.5 hours here, about 2 hours, 40 minutes spent watching videos. So either on TV or on something like YouTube, an hour and a half gaming, and 18-ish minutes on social media. Keep in mind that what I'm talking about now, these are younger children, not adolescents. We know that as kids are getting older, 12 and up, they're spending more and more time on social media. So this is focusing on the younger children. But still, we're talking about almost 5 hours a day of screen exposure, right? When they're not out playing, they're not learning about how to negotiate interactions with other children, they're not engaging with their family. What do we know about how this exposure is impacting kids' development? That is complicated. And as much as we would like to say, oh, yes, this thing causes that thing, X equals Y, we don't have that kind of data yet. But the science is continuing and we are learning more and more, you know, every month we're learning more, right? There's so much research on this now. These were some studies, they were epidemiological, so looking at large sample of children, over 86,000 children and families, and several studies came out of this data that was pretty concerning, and definitely reason for us to think about how we're managing children's screen time and what other factors might be in play here. So in 2022, looking at boys who had longer screen time at 1 year, that was associated with autism diagnoses at 3 years old. I'm going to say again, these studies are not causal studies. We are not saying that the screen use caused autism, but some association there may be related to some other factors. In any case, important for us to be looking at these connections, right? 2023 study, longer exposure to TV and DVD videos at 1 and 2 years old was associated with lower developmental scores at 2 and 3 years old. So looking at how kids were doing a couple years out, right? And then finally, another 2023 study that, and this is also to be expected, looking at mother screen time and the fact that it is positively associated with infant screen time, but this is as young as 1 year, right? So when parents are on their screens more, children are on their screens more. A lot of reasons for that. And we'll talk about that more in a couple moments in a couple different ways. We also see, so those studies were really related to exposure to video, TV, and gaming. This is looking at what's happening with the interactive media, so social media. And like I said, it's still a little bit lower for younger children, but we're seeing younger children becoming interactive with the internet at younger and younger ages. So some of the things already we know that are popular with younger children would be, video-based sites. So things like YouTube, some of the gaming apps that are out there, things like Roblox, and then the other interactive social media sites we tend to see more with our older children and teens, so TikTok, etc. Right. So the interactive media we're seeing less of in the younger children, but that does not mean it's not having an impact. So is exposure to screen time damaging to development? We have some associations, but what about mental health? This is another area where there's not a lot of consensus among researchers and clinicians and the literature. We still have a lot of questions to answer, but this study is one that brought together research looking at exposure to screen time, so that's including television, So this looked at studies that had been done as far back as 1960. So from 1960 to 2021, right? So 60 years of science here. And looking at that as a whole, what do we know about how this exposure is impacting children's mental health? Right. Let me tell you, I know we have some mental health providers out there and we have some educators who may know, but also I don't want to get too jargony for you. So there's two terms I want to break down for you. We talk about in psychology internalizing symptoms and externalizing symptoms, and those are just ways of saying internalizing mental health issues that tend to be we see more inside the child, so things like depression, things like anxiety, right? So when we're talking about internalizing symptoms, that's what we're talking about. When we talk about externalizing symptoms, we're talking about things like aggression, oppositionality, defiance, right? So those are just ways of kind of capturing two different focuses of mental health issues. And so this study pulled together 60 years of the science to look at whether we can see a connection and how big it might be. And what they found is not a huge association, but a meaningful one, a significant one. And that was that they found that in more screen time was associated with aggression and with some ADHD type symptoms, and to a somewhat lesser extent, also to internalizing symptoms like depression and anxiety. Okay. So this is really important. And also, again, kind of check in the concerning box things that make us say, we really do need to be looking at what's happening with screens and we need to be getting involved and not just going on as if this is just going to be the new normal, right? We need to look at this more carefully. So one thing though I need to emphasize here is these studies were only looking at length of time of exposure, duration of exposure, right? And there is a lot more than just the length of time that a child's exposed to. So let's talk about that. It is the most common way that people are measuring what children are getting in terms of screen. How many hours, right? You always see that question in surveys, in research. How many hours a day is a child exposed to screens and what types of screens? But there's a lot. So this is going beyond screen time, right? Not just the time. We know that there is an association there. But from the work that we're doing, it looks like the content of the material that the child sees and the context, we'll talk about what context means in a little bit, but these things are more influential over child outcomes than just saying the number of hours. So we need to move away from number of hours. It's kind of a proxy for something, right? So we're going to talk about the American Academy of Pediatrics. They've got recommendations about number of hours, and that's not meaningless, but it goes how screen time impacts kids is a lot more than just about the number of hours. And specifically, we know that caregiver practices can make a big influence, can have a big influence and make a big difference on whether there is a negative or a neutral or even a positive outcome when children are exposed to screens. All right. Just want to check in for a moment. And Sandra or Stephanie, can you tell me if there's any questions that would make sense to address right now?
No questions at this point, but feel free to put your questions in a message to a host or in the Q&A.
Yeah. Thanks so much. All right. So if we're going to say it's not just about the number of hours, it's about content and it's about context, let's break down what that actually means. So when we're talking about content, we are talking about is a child being exposed to material that is not appropriate for their developmental level? One of those kinds of things that we know that we have some concerns about is exposure to violence in screen media. That has been a subject of study since at least the 60s, right? Basically, since television started coming around. So there is significant literature that associates exposure to violence through screen media to higher levels of behavior problems, higher levels of aggression, higher levels of those externalizing behaviors that we were just talking about. It is a little bit complex too, because we also see that when children have something else going on, for example, a child with ADHD, there may be a stronger relationship between the aggression, the violence they see on the screen, and having more behavior problems, right? So it's not a real simple relationship, but we do see definitely over decades of research that there is an association, right? Similar if that exposure is through television versus other kind of video versus video games. All right, now let's talk some about context. So one of the contexts that one of you already shared is around when is media use more problematic? And you pegged it when you said media use at bedtime. That is probably one of the most problematic times. And there's two, I will tell you, one is at bedtime. Anybody guess what the other time would be? It's mealtime, right? So mealtime and bedtime, two times when we do really worry about having screens present for a variety of different reasons. At bedtime, we know that having screens present is more likely to disrupt children's sleep. It can stimulate children. It can expose them to inappropriate content when they're trying to go to sleep and caregivers are not around. Um, and it can make sleep either shorter or more disrupted. And guess what? We know also there's actually quite a robust association between sleep problems and behavior problems. When a child is brought to me with concerns about behavior problems, one of the first questions we're going to talk about is how is sleep? And how many hours of sleep is a child getting? Because we know that association is quite robust. And so when we see screens disrupting sleep, that's going to be that kind of the thing that's explaining the connection between screen time use and behavior problems. That, yep, sleep is disrupted. Child's only getting about 5 hours of solid sleep a night, and that's associated with their behavior problems. So, content, developmentally appropriate content versus unhealthy or violent content. And then when we know at night causing more problems than at other times. Now, what else about context is important? Well, that's where the family is and caregivers are so important and so influential, right? So, especially when we're talking about younger children and kind of defining that as children under 12, my primary focus is with kids about 2 to 7, but you can stretch this rule in general to around 12 years old. What the family is doing is what the child is doing, right? And so the family and the caregivers' attitudes and interactions with screen media are being modeled, and the child is going to learn those attitudes directly from caregivers. And when I say caregivers, I mean that very broadly, right? Not just parents, but babysitters, grandparents, older siblings, teachers, right? They are absorbing how to interact with screens and social media based on what they're seeing around them, right? And we also see that parenting practices can really help reduce problems around screens. I'm going to get specific about that in just a few moments. But we call that media parenting practices. And there's ways of parenting around media that can actually increase positive outcomes for kids. But also, we want to be thinking about what are the barriers to changing media parenting practice for a family. For example, how many people have been in the situation where you need to um, jump in the shower and you need a way for your child to be distracted and safe for a few minutes. And so putting on the television is the way that you can do that, right? That's a reality of our life these days. And so looking at the limitations to what we can, how we can change parenting around media is also important for us to do when we're trying to come up with sustainable and feasible strategies. But just in case you're wondering what adults tend to be doing, and you know what you're doing, but since the pandemic, about 1/3 of adults report being online basically constantly, every single day. And as far back as 2016, already the average was almost 9 hours of screen time daily, right? So we know that we are on screens a whole heck of a lot. And we just need to be mindful of what we want to be teaching our children about that. So I was talking about the barriers and ways that we can look at developing strategies that can be helpful for children, helpful for families. Well, it's important to look at what we know about the interaction between family stress also and media use. So, for example, when caregivers, when parents are experiencing more psychological distress, they may be using media more for their own relaxation and their own and increasing their own screen time as a way to manage that distress, right? And we also see, though, that the more it's used for relaxation, often the more it's used for technoference. I don't know if you know this term, technoference. It's that moment when you are having a stressful conversation with somebody and they pick up their phone and start texting another friend, right? Or in your family, you're talking to your middle school child about something they don't want to talk about, and they turn to their phone, right? Technoference. It's the interference in our daily relationships by the technology. And so this is something that we need to pay attention to, because when we see this happening, so when we see that it's the media that's being used for, and the screens that are being used for relaxation, when we see that it's the screens that are helping to disrupt the relationship interaction, that's when it's associated with more negative outcomes, right? So we kind of looking out for that and looking for ways that we can avoid those disruptions, right? Because we also see that when we use media for social media for healthy social connections with others, it's actually associated with more positive outcomes. Right? So this is that question also people say, is it always bad? And should my child never be on the screen? And should I never allow them? And from what we see from some of the science, there is a context in which not only is it not harmful, but it can actually be positive. It can be positive. So the thing that's really, really common right now is that when a parent, like I said, when a parent is stressed or when a family is struggling, that we use our mobile devices to distract our children, help them to calm down, um, either help them to regulate their behavior or use it to give us a timeout, right? A time to regulate our own emotions so we get them distracted by the screens. The problems that we see, and this is again based on some studies that have looked at this use, is that using devices to calm children can actually have kind of a paradoxical effect where they become more emotionally reactive. And some of you already mentioned seeing children having more trouble with emotion regulation. And that, in fact, kind of the issues around the screen kind of incites more emotional meltdown, right? And we are seeing that. We're seeing that in the science as well. And in fact, when we use devices as the primary strategy to say, hey, you're upset right now, why don't you go watch your favorite show? Or, hey, I just can't deal with you right now, go play a game online. It replaces the opportunities, it takes the place of opportunities to actually build some important coping skills, right? So it can have this paradoxical effect that we see more reactivity over time instead of less, and it gets in the way of opportunities to actually develop good coping skills. Parents and clinicians have expressed concerns about children being addicted to screens, and you see that a lot in, in lay publications outside of psychology and outside of the science. The problem with that term addiction is it's got some very specific physiological criteria that go with it. So we tend to use the term problematic media use. So when you see that kind of dysregulated media use with children that they want to be on it and they get upset if you limit it, we call that problematic media use to avoid using a term like addiction that really has a lot of connotations that aren't necessarily accurate when we're talking about kids and screens. Um, and we can have that argument with some of our developmental scientist colleagues about it, but that'll be another webinar, right? But what we see is that this problematic media use is often actually also running in tandem with more general behavior problems. So when a child is experiencing different types of behavioral struggles, we often see that screen time use is another one of those struggles. So it is often not something that is separate and on its own. It usually is going along with some other kinds of challenges. But that's actually good news for us, and it's good news for the way that we can help children and families, because the fact that those things go together suggests that they have some similar mechanisms and that we can use similar mechanisms to also manage them. And in fact, that's what we found in the work that my team has done around preventing and treating problematic media use. What we know about some risk factors for problematic media use in young children is we see it more when screens are being used as the main way to help calm or regulate a child. When kids are frequently being exposed to that very highly engaging, highly reinforcing content. When, like I said, it's co-occurring with other behavioral concerns, when families are experiencing a lot of other stressors. Um, and so these are all things that kind of increase the likelihood that you might see problematic media use in a young child. We've got strategies, though, to help reduce the likelihood of that, or reduce it when it's already happening. We're going to talk about that more in a moment. But it's going to be around some good parenting strategies and opportunities to help children learn to interact in positive ways without the screens. All right, going to pause again, see if there's any questions. And while you are doing that, I'm going to switch us over to a little video. Any questions coming through, Stephanie?
We have a couple questions with which I think will foreshadow where you're about to take us
Awesome.
soon. Um, Someone says, I'm curious about the void that screens are filling. Like other addictions, is there an unmet need the child is trying to fill?
Oh, that's a great question. And yes, it really is a great segue to this little clip I'm about to show you. And that actually is kind of like one of the themes of of this presentation, and that is that children really, and again, we're talking about young children who's, the adults in their lives are their lives, right? And what they want is that meaningful interaction. And it doesn't even have to be all the time, and it doesn't have to be lots and lots, but special times when we focus on our children and we give them a meaningful, child-centered, emotionally responsive interaction. That often is a part of when we see the problematic media use decreasing. All right. Was there another one, Stephanie, or should I go ahead?
We have another one. Jeff is interested in the parenting practices that make screen time a positive experience.
All right. That is a great question also. And I'm going to hold that one because we're going to watch this little clip, and then I'm going to describe to you a number of strategies, and that will be one of them.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to show you here, it's about 3 minutes. The NBC technology correspondent, Jake Ward, was very interested in what was happening with young children around screens. And so they did this 2-part little segment. In the first minute, you're going to see describing about how children are connected to the screens and how reinforcing the screens are, and see a little bit and hear from a developmental psychologist. And then you're going to get to see a little bit of what my team has done. And that is developing a way of helping parents to manage those difficult screen times. And that'll kind of propel us into the second part of our presentation here.
22-month-old Maggie Harbison loves her Elmo app.
Elmo ABC.
Elmo ABC. But when it's time to put it away, her mom knows what's coming.
Just throws a tantrum.
Mommy,
Yeah, a little crying, a little falling on the floor. It disappeared.
Elmo, Elmo.
Yeah, I know.
Do you want to read this book?
No.
Sorry, I didn't. Okay.
Now, a study of kids like Maggie is trying to identify who is most likely to get hooked on a screen.
I got it.
Because once kids are, it's like they're different people.
He has gone to the point where he's hit before, yeah.
For parents, the whole world has changed.
I tried talking to them like, hey, when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of this stuff, we played with each other, we interacted with each other.
At Seattle Children's Research Institute, Dr. Dimitri Christakis is looking for certain signs of addiction. Here's one sign.
Speak a little louder. I can't hear you. I have a banana in my ear.
Look.
Ignoring cues from others, like prompts to look or give a tablet back.
The typical 18 to 24-month-old will spend on average 20 to 30 minutes with their favorite toy. We know now that children will happily spend much, much more time with iPads, which touchscreen media. And that alone tells us that there's something fundamentally different about this experience.
You can't possibly move as fast as technology moves, right?
No, in fact, one of the biggest challenges we face is that the pace of science cannot keep up with the pace of tech.
Researchers are trying to address the problem now. Psychologists Sarah Damoff and Larissa Niec have developed a sort of coaching system to address screen addiction.
The first part is helping parents learn how to play with their child, not with screens, with toys. Next, we coach them around how do you set a limit? How do you help them clean up without having a meltdown or
And you literally do that by speaking into their ear.
Exactly, yep, speaking into their ear, giving them the words if they need them.
Heather and Drew remember the moment the screen problem became a crisis for their family.
When he was throwing the rocks at the windows in the backyard. That was the moment.
That was the moment we said, we need help.
Nope, we're calling someone.
But look at them now, after 13 sessions with Dr. Niec in their ear.
We're going to give it maybe another minute, and then we need to move on to the next thing, and we'll play a little bit more too.
Nice job with that preparation. Oh, yeah. And he just accepted that preparation from you, again, because this is all about your relationship with him, and it's not about the screens.
They think, oh, the child wants the screen. No, they don't want the screen, they want you.
Think thank you so much. That's awesome. Even though you didn't want to, but I really appreciate that you did.
Wonderful, praising him.
What's the lesson here for you?
Take the time with your child, and then those things, you're going to get them done.
Once you pay that off,
right,
then you can
pay the debt,
this.
then you can have the fun. Or do the dishes, right?
Right.
Give it to me.
It's an ongoing challenge for all of us.
Thank you so much.
But we all have this skill, giving loving attention to our kids. And that is what a toddler wants even more
Good night, Trine. Good night. More book.
than your phone.
More book.
Right. So gives you just a little look into what we have done to help parents to manage the issue, with the focus really being on that caregiver and child relationship. And really, although I know I say parents a lot, I really want to focus on these are adults, any adults in a young child's life. And so that's you as an educator, as a teacher, as a daycare worker, as a mental health professional, right? These things can help. So we're going to focus now on the strategies that are simple things that that you can do, that families can do and take with them. What you saw from that little clip was about our prevention and treatment model, but there's a lot that I can give you today that you can take with you that are kind of little nuggets of pieces that can still make a difference. So what we do know from the work we've done is that young children want their caregivers. They want that attentive, supportive, emotionally responsive adult caregiver more than they want the screens. And so when we have great general kind of caregiving strategies, that's the first step. And when we help caregivers to have that kind of special, therapeutic, child-centered emotional support rather than screens, then the child is much more willing to be and is able to transition. And you kind of saw it in the clip where the little guy parent asked for the screen and child hesitated for just a second and then handed it to mom and then gave mom a kiss on his shoulder, on her shoulder. Even though he kind of didn't want to give it up, he was okay with it, and he was able to do that and tolerate it because of that warmth that they had between them. And so the strategies we teach caregivers about that warm, responsive interaction, we then help generalize to the screen time situation. So even though these are going to seem like little strategies, some of them, and some of them you might say, oh, I do that, and that'll be great. But some of them are really things that we think we do, but we don't do as much as we can. And some of these little changes can actually make a big difference for kids. So the name of our model that I developed, and you noticed that probably that Central Michigan University was what got highlighted on NBC, but I am very, very glad to be here at UW-Madison now and bringing all the work that I was doing at CMU here. And so this is what we'll be doing starting in the fall. We'll be able to offer our patch program for kids and families here. So sharing just a few therapeutic skills. These are child-centered interaction skills that play therapists use. And when we teach them to parents and educators and you use them with kids in your daily interaction and or in a brief, more intensive special time together, we see a lot of behavior problems actually reducing, not just screen time behavior problems. And PRIDE is our acronym. I'm going to give you a quick flash and some examples of each of these skills. I know we don't have the time to go in depth. Maybe we'll need to do another webinar, or maybe I'll be able to do some training for folks coming down in the next year or two. All right, but what are we doing with PRIDE? What are we teaching? And again, like I said, these are child-centered play therapy skills that we have a lot of evidence that these skills increase children's attention span, increase children's emotion regulation, and increase their language development as well, right? When we use praises for children, we want them to be very specific and genuine, right? This is when you tell somebody, child or others, something you appreciate that they've done. So things that we're thinking about when we're working with kids who are playing with screens, thanking them for being patient, thanking them for staying calm, doing a great job turning off the tablet, thank them for changing activities, right? Lots of ways we can support this. But also, this is just nice for kids at any time when they know what it is that they're doing that you appreciate. Because we all feel better when somebody lets us know what we're doing that they like. R for reflection, and this is really an active listening skill. And when we use it with kids, it helps with their language development. It also helps let them know that we are hearing them, that we're validating their experience. And with kids, and young kids, we really keep it simple. So it's basically saying what they're saying. And even though we are, doing that parrot paraphrasing, what it's doing is help the child to understand they've been heard and help the child to organize their own thoughts and their own behavior, right? I don't like eggs, Mom. Oh, you don't like them, right? Help the child know that they've been heard and help them understand what it is that they are experiencing. So PR, I is for imitate. And when you are engaging in play, some playtime with kids, doing imitation is a really nice thing that, again, kind of lets them know that you see them, that what they're doing is valued, and that you are there in tune with them, right? But D is for describing, and that is basically, so if reflecting is saying what they're saying, describing is saying what a child's doing. And this is a core skill in child-centered play therapy. And again, it really helps children increase their attention span. So if you've got a little one, say you're a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old at the table, and you are describing what they're doing, what they're looking at, what they're choosing, it helps keep them organized. It helps keep them focused in that moment. And it really does. And I'm telling you, and I've been doing this for over 30 years, and you see children who come in kind of bouncing off the walls, who at the end can sit and focus and play with one toy for 30 minutes, right? It really works very well. So we've got praising, reflecting, imitating, describing, and I don't have my E here, but E is for enjoy. And enjoy just when you are engaging with a child, sharing some positive affect, right? Letting them know that you appreciate them, that you enjoy having that time together. And if you can do this in even a 5-minute daily time with them, a 5-minute special therapeutic time that you just have that's just you and them, and you focused really on them and avoiding demands on yourself or demands on the child. Just 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes each day makes a huge difference. Okay, let's talk about some screen-specific strategies, and then we'll open it up for some questions, right? So what we have the pride skills. We have our child-centered therapeutic engagement strategies. And in our program, we also coupled that with strategies that are going to help with the media use specifically, right? So our time, if you use some time around screens with kids, you're going to have a positive outcome, right? So first is screen use should be time limited. All the research, well, I'm going to back that up, of course, not all, but so much of the research that we have is looking at duration, and we know that duration does matter, and duration, when kids have more screen use, it is more likely to be associated with problems, mental health issues, behavioral issues. So time limited. I is for involved. I'm going to tell you more about what that means in a second. M is for keeping media-free zones, especially at least 2 key me zones. And E is preventing exposure to inappropriate content. Okay, so what does that look like? Time limited. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics encourages us to limit screen use to less than an hour for children 2 to 5 years old, right? And what we know is that children 2 to 5 years old are getting about 5 hours a day of exposure, right? So being able to set some limit, and maybe reducing it to an hour isn't feasible for every family, but the more we can reduce it, the fewer problems we're going to find associated with it, right? So time limited, and figuring out what that looks like in the context of every family is really important. Now, being involved, someone asked, what can we do to help make the screen time a positive outcome? And this is one of the core components, right? So what we mean by being involved is something we call active mediation. And that means that caregivers, whether that's a parent or a teacher, is involved in the child's time on that screen. And so imagine a child watching a video and the parent is with them, and the parent can help process what the child's getting exposed to, what they're experiencing, reflecting, for example, on emotions that maybe characters in a story are having. Or when a commercial comes on television, the parent helping the child understand that what's being said is about selling things. It's not that it will be as, necessarily as good as they say. Helping kids to process this information. This is active mediation. And what we see, in fact, is that when parents use active mediation in the context of children's screen exposure, that actually children have higher developmental outcomes, right? So that's when we actually see things that can be positive from screen exposure when parents are involved, right? Media-free zones. Again, we know that it's not feasible for every family to say there's not going to be any media exposure anywhere in the house. But the 2 key places where I mentioned before that are really important to take away screens are bedtime, mealtime. So don't be eating in front of the TV. Don't stick the tablet in front of the child who's trying to eat. Avoid putting a television in the child's room. Avoid having a child have access to smartphone, tablet, gaming after bedtime, right? Media-free zones. Those are going to be the 2 biggest zones that have the most influence on problematic outcomes. And then finally, preventing exposure to inappropriate content. That kind of circles back to being involved and knowing what your child is watching. But also, it is hard to keep up with what comes out. I could not tell you all the different child shows and the things that come on that are targeting kids but are really about selling products. However, commonsensemedia.org, Common Sense Media, they have a great set of resources, and they have actually reviewed so much content, and you can go on and put in, like, my child wants to watch this show and I don't even know really what it's about. You can go to Common Sense Media and put the show in, and then they'll give you like what it's about, what might be some risks, what are some, what age is appropriate for. It's a very good resource for families who are trying to keep up with what is coming out in the world. What is my child being exposed to? Okay, so time. Take that with you. This is just actually it's another way of looking at the time. It takes the information from our intervention and puts it into kind of a digestible form for parents. And also, if people are interested in these, you could contact Stephanie. Are they able to contact you after or something? Is there a way we could make what I'm looking for is possibly a way to make this content available for you in case you're interested in looking at it again.
Absolutely. I'll put my email address in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, and this is the commonsensemedia.org. that I mentioned, good resource for parents and educators as well. Okay, so last thing I'm going to give you we've got these different strategies. How can I use them around screen exposure, screen time use? Some cues, using those child-centered therapeutic skills and implementing the time strategies and thinking about these specific moments around transition, around setting limits, and around exposure to content, right? So using those strategies in these moments is really going to help you, and again, kind of have the most impact on a child's ability to accept limits on screen use, be able to transition from screen use to other activities, and be able to set them up for success. And again, just kind of reinforcing child-centered skills plus the time skills, right? And thinking about the entire family's use of screens and whether or not that might be impacting a child's use of screens as well. All right, so what happened to Cody? Tell you a little bit more about Cody. So as I said, when parents came in, they were really distraught and they weren't sure what to do. And Cody was having a lot of other behavior problems in addition to the screen use problems. So he was really, it was really appropriate for him to join, he and his family to join our patch program. And they engaged in the program very enthusiastically and completed the program. And what they found, so they learned those child-centered interaction strategies. They learned some really effective limit setting strategies, general limit setting, right? And not just around screens, but in general. And then we practiced it in real life, in vivo, like you saw me on the NBC segment with the microphone and the parent with the bug in her ear, hearing me help her in the moment to use the skills with Cody. And when the family left, they no longer were experiencing any significant behavior problems. Cody was managing screen use very happily with no big behaviors around them. And parents expressed feeling confident and calm and relieved that they had been able to have this in their family. So it was really a great experience. So just a few takeaways for you. I know it's been a quick tour through a lot of information, but I hope you get to take some of this with you. I hope you find some of it helpful. We know that excessive screen use can impact children's functioning, but we also know that it's more than just the amount of screen use. It's the context and it's the content. And we also know from the work that I've done that young children want the meaningful interaction more than they want the screens. They want those moments of emotional responsiveness from the adults in their lives. And when they get that, the screens are less interesting to them, right? So those child-centered strategies with active mediation and healthy limit setting are really key to managing the problematic media use. So just like to give a thank you to all my research team and also to the families who have been a part of our clinic and have allowed us into their lives and allowed us to help them on the next step of their journey. And also like to let you know if you have questions about the clinic that's going to be coming up in the fall, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much. I'd like to open it for questions.